Welcome back, people. Today, let's learn about positioning in CSS. Always remember that all the HTML elements have predefined rules of how it should be displayed on a website, even if you don't mention any CSS rules. We have to understand how things get positioned by default before changing it to our will. So, let's look at the rules. The first rule is content is everything. We already know that inline element only take up as much width and height as content, and in case of block elements, even though it takes up entire width of screen, the height is still determined by content. So content determines how large it gets displayed and what its height and width will be even without CSS. The second rule is order comes from code. Let's say we have three div. As we mentioned here, we have three div, one with the class of red, one with class of yellow, and one with class of green. Here in the web page, it is ordered as specified in the code. First the red, second yellow, and third green. Let's say we change the order of the classes. I mean the order of the div. Let's give red second and yellow at the top. Save this, refresh, you'll see the yellow is at the top and red is present second. This is because the code have yellow first, red second, and green third. That is how it is being displayed. This means that default layout order is determined by our code. The third rule is children sit on top of parents. What exactly do we mean by that? Let's say we have a div with the class of yellow and we add a h1 tag inside the div element. So the div element is the parent and h1 tag is the child or children. So let's give it a value of hello world. Let's save this and run. You can see the parent, that is the div element, is at the bottom and the h1 tag is on top of the div element. If you put h1 as the parent element and div inside the h1 tag, then the words hello world will not be visible because it would be behind the div element. To understand this better, let's color the h1 tag to, let's say, blue. I guess you can understand it better now. The h1 tag is on top of the parent div. So now let's erase this. It's not required anymore. So from this we understand that children sit on top of parent. So it is more towards the viewer. These three are the default rules of how HTML elements get rendered even without CSS rules. We can change this by setting the position property to make the element look the way that we want it to instead of going along with the default layout. There are four types of CSS position properties. They are static, relative, absolute, and fixed. Let's look at static. All the HTML elements are static in their position by default, which means it follows the above three rules and keep with the default HTML flow. The next one is relative. Relative positioning allows us to position the elements that we select relative to how it would have been positioned if it was static. To understand better, let's look at an example. The yellow is at its static position. I mean, all the three div elements are at its static position. So what we are going to do is go to CSS and go to the yellow class, change its position to relative. So now what we did is change the position of yellow class to relative and moved it left by 50 pixels, which means it moved 50 pixels from its left margin. So the original static position, the left margin would have been aligned with the margin of the red div, but now we specify that the position is relative, so it is 50 pixel away from the original static margin. So when we change its position to relative, the current position, that is static position, will be considered, and whatever changes that we make will be made from that particular position. Let's say we move this to the top by 50 pixels. Now the div element has moved from top by 50 pixels, so the original position would have been somewhere around here. So now it's moved by 50 pixels. Now let's change it to bottom. Save this, reload. Now it's moved from its bottom margin by 50 pixels. Let's say right, save it, reload. Now it has moved by 50 pixel from its right margin. We can use top, bottom, left and right coordinates along with the relative positioning. There are two things that you have to remember while using relative positioning. When you change the relative position of the element, it does not affect the position of anything else on the screen. The old position is kept and everything else flows around it. What we mean is, even if it is moved by 20 pixels from the top, let's see that how that works. Even when it's moved by 50 pixels from top margin, the red div and the green div doesn't change its position. They stay static, but the yellow is overlapping the red div because it moved 50 pixels from the top margin, which means the original position stays as it is, but the div moves from its original position 50 pixels away from the top margin. So I hope you would have understood static and relative positioning. Thank you for watching the video. Do like, share and subscribe to Supporting Tech.